All right. Good morning, good morning, good morning. All right. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Good morning, Lady Barbara. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy holy days to each and every one of you. I hope everybody had a great Christ Mass, a great holy day on yesterday, that you got an opportunity to be with friends and family who care for you. Keyword, care for you. Nothing like being around people who care absolutely nothing for you. So I don't want to wish that on anybody. But I hope that you were around people who cared for you. Some people say, well, just go to the celebration, etc., etc. And yeah, you already know my motto. If it requires fake smiling, I'm probably not going to go. If it requires me being around somebody that I know is poisonous to my personal being, I'm probably not going to show up. If it requires me standing in front of someone who I know has done me wrong or is unrepentant and I'm supposed to smile and act like everything's okay, I'm probably not going to show up. Matter of fact, don't even invite me. All right? That's how you keep peace for the holidays. Okay? That was a tip. Because some of y'all are still in your holidays where you're going to see people before January 1st. All right? How do you have peace for the holidays? Don't put yourself in situations where you know there's going to be conflict. A part of as much as lieth within you, live at peace with all men, is sometimes not even getting yourself in the environment that you know is going to cause conflict. All right? I know some people feel like, well, I just have to go and I just have to be there. Good morning, Alana. And I just have to talk to that person. No, you do not. If you know you have nothing good to say, all right? If you know you have nothing good to say, if you know that seeing that person still gets your blood boiling, if you know that hearing that person's voice makes you angry, all right? There are certain things that we can do to live in peace. And part of that is not putting yourself in a place where you know that's going to take you out of peace, that's going to bring confusion, that's going to bring an argument, that's going to ignite anger. All right? So this is what I have learned over the years. The best thing for me to do is to not put myself in an environment that is going to be conducive to arguments, to anger, to confusion, to the loss of my peace. I don't care who it is. All right? And so you've got to protect your peace. You've got to protect your peace. Are there going to be situations and circumstances that you find yourself in that you didn't place yourself in? Yes. But when at all possible, if you cannot place yourself in the situation, then be at peace by not placing yourself in the situation. Here's another thing I learned. This is Teachable Tuesday. Good morning to everybody. This is Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. I'm trying to give you a little bit of light to keep you out of darkness over the holidays. All right? So, if you find yourself in a situation that you didn't ask for, you didn't bargain for, right? Okay? The scripture is very clear about avoiding certain kinds of people. It tells you, avoid these people. All right? It also says, if you have already gone to them and you've tried to correct the situation, all right, and they choose not to correct that situation or they choose to keep going in the same direction, it says avoid those people. Have nothing to do with them. And you may get flack from your family members. I totally understand that. But you have to do what is conducive to peace for your life and your household. All right? If 2017 has taught me anything at all, it is in order to maintain good health, Part of maintaining good health is to maintain your peace and protect your peace and reduce the stress in your life. Here's another thing. I went to bed thinking about this. I woke up thinking about it. So it's probably something that I need to talk about before we begin our readings. And that is the spirit of manipulation. Somebody hashtag manipulation. Because I'm about to go in. Manipulation. All right. I don't have any notes for this. Normally I have notes, but I'm just going to give you what the Lord's given me. All right. Manipulation. Do not allow people to manipulate you this holiday season. And really it's 2 words, holy days. Okay, that's where the word holiday comes from. Little, etymology for you. Okay? Don't allow people to manipulate you this holiday season. There are many ways that manipulation can come in the form of. All right? Let's start with some simple ones. Okay? Manipulation can come in the form of forcing you or putting you in an environment with someone that your family knows causes conflict. And you love all of your family members, but you refuse to be put in a place, you refuse to be put in a place with people that you know and they know cause conflict for you. All right? And maybe you've had a conversation with your family members before the holiday season starts and said, look, I don't want to talk to X. I don't want to communicate with Y. And I don't want to be in the presence of Z. All right? And your family acts like, hey, they know. They're aware of what your feelings and desires are. They nod their head. They say they understand. And then next thing you know, X, Y, and Z are in your presence. So what do? Recognize what it is. Recognize what spirit is operating. It's the spirit of manipulation. Okay? Maybe that person thought that, well, if I get you two in a room or if I get this person on the phone and they start talking to you, then, you all will be able to resolve the issue. Listen. All right? Because I'm getting inboxes from people saying, pray for me because I'm dealing with a conflict and I have to be in X amount of space with this person for the next week or whatever. Listen. As much as lieth within you, live peaceably with all men. As much as possible, avoid having conversations with the person that you know is bringing conflict. But also have a conversation with the person who manipulated the situation. All right? And make them understand you are not going to be manipulated into having a conversation with someone who, number 1, may be unrepentant, number 2, may be argumentative, and number 3, may not be ready to reconcile. All right? One thing you cannot do with reconciliation is you cannot force it. You cannot force reconciliation. Both parties have to be willing to come to the table for reconciliation to truly be real and effective. All right? Forced reconciliation does not work. That means one person walks away feeling satisfied and the other person walks away feeling like I just been manipulated. All right? So you cannot force reconciliation, people. It has to be both sides willing to come to the table. All right? Another form of manipulation that people see over the holidays is, maybe you are a person who provides financially for the family quite a bit. All right? People may lean on you to be that financial support. Some ways that manipulation can happen over the holidays is all of a sudden everybody has a need. Or maybe everybody is aware that you are, the largest breadwinner in your family. So everybody comes to you with their needs. Maybe you might have some things that you need to take care of at the end of the year, but because they know that you make the most money, okay, or maybe they overheard or are aware that you might have received some sort of financial increase or some financial bonus at the end of this year, all of a sudden everybody is telling you their sad song. and their sad, sad story. And next thing you know, you're pulling out your checkbook and you're writing checks to several of your family members. Listen, that's a form of manipulation, people. It is. It's a form of manipulation. So those of you who everybody in your family comes to for support, everybody leans on, everybody asks money from, everybody borrows from but does not pay, you got to decide, what kind of boundaries are you going to have? Do you have boundaries around your finances around this time? Because if you don't, you're going to be manipulated, okay, into supporting people who are able-bodied and may even already have the finances. They just want to know if you're going to give them money. All right? So don't be manipulated. Don't be manipulated. Here's one more. All right? I know there's a lot, but I just wanted to cover these main three. Here's one more. I call it third-party manipulation. Third-party manipulation. What do I mean? It means, once again, you may have a conflict. You may have something that needs to be settled. It may be a family issue, etc. It may be a friendship issue. And the person, rather than go to you directly, likes to use a third-party person to come and give their information to that person and have that person communicate with you. Rather than them going to you, rather than them settling their conflict with you, rather than them reconciling with you, they continue to stay on the outskirts, all right? And they feed information to a third party. That third party could be your close friend. That third party could be a family member that you are in, good fellowship, good relationship with. And then that family member or that friend gets caught in the middle. And they're like, well, I don't understand why you two can't get together. Listen, it's manipulation. And they're using that person, that middle person, as a tool of manipulation. Sometimes that person can't see it. So you cannot fault them. But what you can do is you can refuse to communicate through a third party for something that needs to be handled between you and the other person. All right? And if you're all believers, Matthew 18 is very clear on this. If you have an ought, or if there is a conflict, you're supposed to first go to you and that person. If they've not done step number one and you're playing middleman, if they have not done step number one and you're playing middleman, your responsibility as the middleman is to say, have you gone to X, Y, and Z and had this conversation with them? If they can't answer that, if they can't say yes or no, you as the middleman need to step out of the way and let them do the respectful and proper thing, and that is to talk to that person. Because what happens is conflicts tend to drag on and on and on and on because that person who refuses to do the right thing initially keeps getting more and more and more middlemen involved. And so the situation never gets reconciled between them and the person because they're dragging other people into the middle of an issue that should have been settled between them and the person. All right? And so sometimes some of us find ourselves being the middleman and we don't realize that we've been used and manipulated until we realize, wait a minute, that person never even went to them, but they're coming to me, giving me the information. They're coming to me, telling me how they feel about this person when they've never communicated that to the person. All right. So you don't want to be manipulated. You don't want to be a tool of manipulation. You don't want people to have an opportunity this holiday season to try to manipulate you out of monies that you may be saving up for something. You may need to pay your bills come January 12th. January 2018. You may be trying to get caught up on some debts of your own. All right. So again, I want to caution people. Don't allow the spirit of manipulation to come into this season. All right. And I'm going to throw another one in there. Poop. And this is about leaders. Don't allow spiritual leadership to manipulate you during the holiday season. All right. I'm a leader, so I can talk about it. Yeah. Don't allow people to manipulate you during the holiday season. Give what God has placed in your heart to give. If God is telling you over the holiday season, give to a charity, give to a charity. If God is telling you over this holiday season to give to the homeless directly, give to the homeless directly. Okay? But don't allow people to manipulate you in this holiday season. All right? I'm done. I think that's all. Okay. All right. Back to our reading. We want to finish this chapter on the end goal of hospitality, and we're going to stop in this book and come back 2018, the Lord wills, in this book here. And we want to finish today Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, Slavery and the Rise of the European Capitalism. If we get through these two, I will be a happy camper. And then 2018, we will pick up again on Tuesdays with the Black Bourgeoisie. If we have some time today, we may get to it, but I seriously doubt it. So we're just going to run with what we have and see how much time we have left. So I hope that, again, everybody has been having a pleasant holy day season thus far, and that you will continue to have this great and wonderful season. It will continue to be that for you. This is our last week of Daring Dialogues. Friday will be our last broadcast. All right? So let's go. We've been talking about the end goal of hospitality, and part 2 of this book, when we come back in 2018, is going to talk about the plan. How do you get started? How do you set yourself up for success? How do you meet your neighbors? Practical rhythms of hospitality that's probably already built into your schedule, so that you know, you're not necessarily going completely out of the way. How do you get to the gospel when you're ministering to your neighbors? So just very, very good, helpful, practical tips. All right. So that's what we're going to do as far as part 2 in 2018. Our lives as well. This is the section we're on now. In his first letter to the church of Thessalonica, Paul poetically delivered this simple but challenging phrase: "We loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well." 1 Thessalonians 2:8. Our lives as well is a beautiful description of how the gospel moved forward in this church that Paul planted. This ecclesia, rather, that Paul planted. He shared his life with these people, and they became disciples as a result. Now, I find it very interesting that you have a group of people who are going back to the ecclesia model, right? But then you have people who are now trying to insult the ecclesia model by saying, you know, it's not a real assembly. You know, why would you want to meet in a house? You need to come to the big box. I call the mega church the big box, right? So, but scripture plainly shows us that there was house fellowship. There was ecclesia. There was people sharing their lives with each other, not just sharing the text. Let me say that again. There were people that were sharing their lives with each other, not just sharing the text of scripture with each other. All right. And as they did that, these people became disciples as a result. So they were sharing their lives. They were sharing the gospel of Christ. They were sharing the miraculous works of Christ. They were also ministering out of the gifts of the Spirit. And they were ministering the word in power. And people were getting saved and healed, delivered, and set free in house ecclesias. And those who were there became disciples as a result. That was the normal pattern. All right. And now today, here we are, 2017, and people are actually shunning the normal pattern. They're actually trying to tell you that this is strange, or this is unusual, or there's something spooky or creepy going on, when in actuality, no, most people have decided we want to move back to what the ecclesia was actually doing. because it was effective. All right. He says, over the years, I've taught on this verse many times that when we as ordinary believers in Christ share our lives with others, God uses us in unforeseen ways. We have taught this concept to our children over the years as we've tried to model what it looks like to be ordinary believers who invite others into our lives. I'm not saying this is trouble-free. It's not easy to lay down our comforts, our time, our homes, our very lives. The easiest thing for me to do after a long day is convince myself that I am tired and I deserve nothing more than a night of isolation away from all humanity. But it is worth it. The gospel is worth it, and the village-like relationships that are created with neighbors and friends as a result are worth it. One cool thing is that over time, our children have come to embrace this value because it's been instilled in their lives from an early age. The village is not a fictional idea for them, it is real. They have not been indoctrinated by a culture of isolation. It's common that multiple times a week, someone is sharing a meal with us in our home. It has become a practice rhythm to closely and consistently share our lives with people. By grace, this has become a part of who we are, and it is driven by the elementary expression we repeat often around our families, our lives as well. One evening when I arrived home after work, my then 6-year-old son asked, "Who is coming over tonight?" I told him no one and proceeded to let him know all the reasons I deserved a quiet night. With a smirk, he confidently said, "Our lives as well, Dad, our lives as well." To which I replied, "Son, seriously?" He smiled and said, "It's in the Bible, Dad. It's in the Bible. Nothing like a good Jesus juke. Nothing like a good Jesus poke from a 6-year-old, right?" But he's right. If we're going to live as God's missionary people, we must learn to share more than our words. We must share our lives as well. Yes, all people need the local ecclesia. They also need a spiritual place in their neighborhood. They need someone who loves Christ and lives near them to act out the gospel for them by welcoming them and exuding the warmth that only people who have been already helped by and healed by Christ can give. They need to experience a shadow of the communion table by breaking bread over your kitchen table. They need to see an example of a normal, relatable person who loves Christ and isn't self-righteous or judgmental. They need your very presence and eventually your words to communicate to them that God is not distant and cold, but gracious and welcoming just as you are. Your home can become that spiritual place, and there's no better time than to put the hospital back in hospitality. But for this care and healing to happen, we must shift our homes from being a fortress of comfort to a hospital of refuge. All right? So, here's something that people who are prophets and prophetic run into when they're trying to practice this, okay? Some of you are seers, right? Some of you can see things about a person, and if you are not mature in the prophetic, you will begin to think that just because you can see it, that you're supposed to say it. Let me sip my OJ. And I get it. When I was very young in the prophetic, I would see things about people and I would start telling them what I saw. And that would, sometimes it would create shock. And I know some people like shock value, but that's not a good thing when you're trying to win people to Christ. Sometimes it would create shock. Sometimes it would create distancing, because that person is like, I don't want to get close to them because they see too much in me. All right. So it was actually repelling people from wanting to have fellowship because they knew that you could see things about them or discern things about them. Some of you have a strong gift of bodily discernment. All right. You can sense things about people. You can sense things about their emotion. All right. You know that scripture that talks about the fragrance of Christ, where there's also the fragrance of sin. It's called a stench. And some of you can discern it. Some of you can smell it. All right. Just because you can sense something doesn't mean that you should say something. I hope y'all wrote that down. Just because you can sense something doesn't mean that you should say something. It doesn't mean that it's the time to share it. Sometimes God is allowing you to sense things and to see things about that person to better be able to minister to them, not necessarily to reveal what you see. All right? And this is important when you're talking about winning people to Christ, and that word hospitality. All right? So I'm going to go back to what he said because this is important. They need to see an example of a normal, relatable person who loves Christ and isn't self-righteous or judgmental. They need your very presence to communicate to them that God is not distant and cold, but gracious and welcoming. So, how do you know when you're growing in your maturity? When God can show you something about someone and you don't feel the need to tell them what you see. When God can show you something about someone and you take that information and you use it in a positive way to help that person's life. Okay, to ease a burden that may be occurring in that person. Maybe they do feel lost. Maybe they do feel down. Maybe they do feel depressed. It's not necessarily for you to say, hey, I see that you're depressed over X, Y, and Z. Sometimes your offer of a conversation, your offer of dinner, your offer of a cup of coffee can sometimes do more for that person's depression and mood than you simply saying, I see that you're depressed. All right? A gospel counterculture. When we join God in his mission of hospitality, we are actually creating a counterculture here on earth. Our homes become micro previews of heaven where we put God's warmth and joy and presence on display. Imagine this. What if your house or apartment became known as that house in your neighborhood? What if your home became a little bright spot in your community that people walk or drive by your door, their heads turn a little, and they start to wonder what's different about you because you don't seem to think about your home the same way everyone else in the neighborhood does. This is possible for us because we can reject the values of our culture and pursue the values God intends for his people. In so doing, we become a radical alternative to the world's way of thinking. John Piper says it this way: when we practice hospitality, we experience the thrill of feeling God's power conquer our fears and our stinginess and all the psychological gravity of our self-centeredness. And there are a few joys, if any, greater than the joy of experiencing the liberating power of God's hospitality, making us a new and different kind of people who love to reflect the glory of his grace as we extend it to others in all kinds of hospitality. That is exactly the type of counterculture you have the potential to create in your neighborhood. I recently had a neighbor who moved to my neighborhood in South Carolina from Connecticut. And when I met him, he said, "You guys have people at your house all the time. What are you doing? Playing bridge or something?" I informed him that I had no idea how to play bridge. Our hope is that questions like that will become more normal as our homes become beacons of God's hospitality and beautiful pictures of the gospel. Because the truth is, radically different people get noticed. When we practice biblical hospitality, we become radical in the most normal way possible. The gospel has the power to transform us into that new and radically different kind of people and create beautiful countercultural groups of Christians so moved by God's hospitality to them, they can't help but be hospitable to others. All right? So, I want you to think about that. How can, in 2018, how can you shift your home to a place that is seen as a place of care and healing? How can you shift your home to be a place that's seen as a place of care and healing? And here's the other thing that I realize as a marketplace person, someone who operates in the marketplace. If you're working, maybe you're working at a school, you're working at a business office, facility, etc. Sometimes we can create these places of hospitality right where we are, even in our work environment. What do I mean by that? When I worked as a library assistant, there would be students, right, that would come into our particular space because they found our space hospitable. Those particular students, we would welcome them in. We would have some conversation with them. We would talk about their classes, see what was going on, see what they might have needed help in. And the students that came by regularly, okay, that hung out in the library, they became a pretty kind of close-knit group. Now, I didn't preach to them Christ, right, because of the setting that I was in, but I made them feel welcome to be in that space. And then I would find out what their birthdays were. I remember over the holidays at one point, we would give them, you know, little treats and different things like that. So recently, I've been out of that environment for about 2 years now. Recently, one of my ex-students reached out to me on Facebook. It was really a complete surprise. And they inboxed me, and what they said literally was, it made me stop in my tracks. It really did. I can't read it to you because I'm using both of my devices, but what they said was, after they left school, they came to know Christ, and they knew that my husband had somehow connected to another part of their family. And they said, when I put 2 and 2 together, because your husband was very kind and he was ministering to my father and my sister, and then when I put 2 and 2 together that you were both husband and wife, then I could see why they were ministered to by your husband. Now that just blessed me all in and of itself, because we are one. So really our character and demeanor should be hopefully expressing oneness as a married couple. But then she said, I don't know if you remember me, but I was one of the students that would always drift into the library space. And she said, I don't know if you remember, but one day for my birthday, you gave me a pair of fuzzy socks. And she was like, I was feeling really down at the time, and I was, you know, kind of feeling down because nobody at the school was really, you know, saying happy birthday to me. But you took the time to actually give me some furry socks and say happy birthday. Like, you actually noticed and remembered me. And she said, and later, after I left high school, I came to know Christ, but I was able to go back and remember. I remembered there was something different about you from the other administrators, from the other people that were working at the school. And she said, and now I realized what it was. It was Christ in you that made you stand out and be different from the other people that were working there. Now, did that bless me? Yes, it did. Because very often, sometimes people don't tell you, right, how you're making a difference in your life, in their life, and they certainly don't go and find you on Facebook to tell you. But that was important to me that she got it. Like, that was the whole point. That I tried to live my life as a living epistle, so I don't have to go around with a sign on my t-shirt, all right, or a sign on my forehead that says, I am a believer. I believe that if we're following the teachings of Christ, it's going to show in our walk. It's going to show in how we treat people. It's going to show in how we talk to people. It's going to show in how we want to forgive people. It's going to show in how we want to reconcile. It's going to show in how we're not going to be putting up with manipulation, because that's not the spirit of Christ, right? So again, yes, Lady Barbara said, light in this dark world. That's what he is talking about. He's talking about our need to be light in this dark world. So maybe some of the principles in here, maybe you're in a living environment where you feel like, man, I want to do that, but right now I just can't see how I'm going to bring people into my living environment. Maybe you are not at that place yet. But maybe you have created an environment in your workspace. Maybe you have created a niche in your workspace where people come and they talk to you. Sometimes some of you don't maybe know that you have the gift of counseling, but you find that you can be sitting there minding your own business, and all of a sudden people are coming in one by one, and they're just sitting down, and they're just all of a sudden opening up to you and talking to you. Could it be because they see the counselor on the inside of you? I'm just saying, you know. So you have to take a look at that, and you have to think about it, especially those of you who may be on work break right now. This is a good time to think about, how can I create an inviting environment in my workplace that people will feel the Spirit of Christ operating in and through me, that I won't be the coworker that people are trying to avoid, because every time they come around, they're rude, they're mean, they're nasty, they have a bad attitude, and they're complaining, and then it rubs off on everyone else in the work environment and brings a negative energy. Everybody knows someone like that. Put some hearts on the screen if you know someone like that. All right? That people do not want to be around them because of the energy that they bring. It's negative. It brings down the morale of the people they're working with. They never have any good thing to say. They're always complaining. There's always something wrong. Okay? Even when something good happens to them, they're still finding something negative in the good. Everybody has at least one of those people in a workplace environment. The thing is, you don't want to be that person. All right? You don't want to be that person. So be thinking about that as we go into 2018. How can I make my neighborhood, how can I make my home, how can I make my workplace a place that is inviting for people? That when people see me coming, they don't have to roll their eyes, suck their teeth, let out a breath, hold their breath, hoping that, they're not noticed by you. You don't want to be that. All right? You want to be the opposite. So let's finish up Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust today. We're reading chapter 10, which is the broader dimensions of the crisis, and then chapter 11, which asks the question, when will we memorialize the victims of our Holocaust? All right? And this is pretty extensive, so I'm going to hope that I get through. We've got about 23 minutes. The broader dimensions of the crisis. I have no great feelings for the Japanese and the new yellow racism that is developing among them, but I have some admiration for the way they recovered from defeat and dealt with their conqueror. They never let their mind forget the nature of their defeat, who defeated them, and how. They knew without shouting, without holding a single mass meeting, that their enemy threw 2 atomic bombs on their nation. They have figuratively and literally asked the question, if the Japanese were one of the 2 main enemies you had in war, why did you throw 2 bombs on the Japanese instead of 1 on each enemy? In the rise of their own racism, they have properly interpreted the racism of those who defeated them militarily, but not commercially. The assumption is that they threw 2 on you because you were not white. They imprisoned your people because you are not white. The Japanese refused to let their enemy take away from them their self-confidence and their idea of God as they conceive God to be. If a people can hold on to that, you can recover from almost anything. Now let's end by saying what we could have done to recover from the disaster of the world Christopher Columbus did not discover. During the concept of Caribbean Federation, the first thing we should have done was to unify all of those islands and have a common defense force. Therefore, there would have been no Grenada and no Panama invasion. There would have been a common currency, a common defense force, an economic union. What one couldn't produce, the other could produce. A common tax structure. Put them all together and look at all the territory you've got once you've developed a common unity and a common parliament. Every state in the United States has its own state legislature and local representation. Yet every state in the United States has representation in Washington. So, having a common parliament for all the Caribbean islands does not keep them from having local things specifically to take care of local situations, as well as having a common parliament to take care of island-wide situations. And we have not dealt with the contradictions. The concept of Pan-Africanism was created by 3 Trinidadians: H. Sylvester Williams, C.L.R. James, and George Padmore. Why is it that they could never unify Trinidad or a single island? The mission of Pan-Africanism was to unify the survivors of our Holocaust that Christopher Columbus and his associated European thugs set in motion. The Japanese sent their children to the leading schools of the world to learn all the necessary skills and bring them home. Are there any foreigners building their airplanes or building their ships? They do it themselves. When you have to call your former master back to do basic things for you, you're not free. You have re-enslaved or recolonized yourself. We spend too much time celebrating, too much time with our fists in the air, too much time talking about black power without having any of it. Now remember, this was written in the late 90s, all right? This is still true today, what he just said. Alton Maddox has said the civil rights movement was a consumer rights movement, and indeed it was. We were fighting to consume somebody else's hamburger. We made white hotels rich by having our conferences there. All of the conferences that black people have each year would allow us to build 10 major hotels at once. I think people are waking up to this, and now you see people saying, let's buy the block, let's build our own, let's buy our own hotels, right? He says, we could employ each other. Looking at all the empty land doing nothing, we could have a series of farms scattered over every state. We could raise our own food. It would be much better if we stopped eating out out of the can all the time. We know what comes out of the ground. We've a brother putting it in the ground, a brother taking it out, and a brother putting it on a truck. Look how many people you are employing. What did we lose everywhere? The concept of nation responsibility. This is what has been taken away from us during these 500 years. This is the supreme tragedy on our mind in the world Christopher Columbus did not discover. Programming our mind to convince us that we could not even make a safety pin. If you can't make a safety pin, you can't make a locomotive. We have to tabulate how many years we're going to be dependent on other people for basic survival. The bargaining chip sooner or later will be, I will close off your community and let nothing come in. Then what are you going to do? 2017, we are here. Chicago. And Chicago is not the worst city for crime in America. Go look it up. It's not even in the top 5. But what are they doing? They're now announcing that they want the UN peacekeeping troops in Chicago. People, that's not about peacekeeping. Wake up. That's not about peacekeeping. I'm going to read what he just said again. He said, how many years are we going to depend on other people for basic survival? That means food, water, clothing, energy. The bargaining chip sooner or later is going to become, I will close off your community and let nothing come in. Then what are you going to do? If you don't make your own food, what are you going to do? If you aren't in control of your water, you don't own a water plant, you don't know how to process water, purify water, what are you going to do? Flint, Michigan. Not only have you not learned how to make a gun, you haven't learned how to fix one. All of these veterans coming out of the Army with all of this skill, and I've said this before, have you learned how to marshal that skill, how to tap that skill, how to educate the basic citizens in your community on self-defense? You have all this self-defense training, and everyone around you in your community is defenseless. You have skills and knowledge that you can be imparting to young people on how to defend themselves and put down the guns, but you're sitting on it, and you're an Army veteran. These veterans could have gone to Africa and built some of the finest armies in the world. I have often said the black man, properly equipped, properly inspired, and properly led, is the greatest human fighting machine the world has ever known. However, our skill has always gone to fighting for other people, fighting other people's wars and other people's battles. Let's go to Africa itself. There are Africans educated in Africa with African money who are scattered all over the world. They want to be everything but Africans. They have turned Africa over to a bunch of thugs. Coup after coup after coup. Who is going to give Africa the stability that it needs? I maintain, and this might be away from the subject, that there is no solution for African people except for some form of pan-African nationalism, no matter how you cut it. No matter what island you're from, no matter what state you're from, no matter what religion you belong to, we must develop a concept of our pan-Africanism that cuts across religion, politics, social, fraternity, sorority, and allows us to proudly face the world as one people. I'm going to tell you who does this well. You know who does this well? Native Americans. When you saw the Native American nations coming together over the Dakota pipeline, notice you did not hear anybody say, I'm a gay Native American, I'm a Democrat Native American, I'm a Republican Native American, I'm an Alaskan Native American, I'm a black Native American. Listen, they put aside their religious practices, their political practices, their social practices, and they face the world as one people. They showed you how to do it. And what did people focus on? What was their tagline? I can tell you what it is. Water is life. They came together and they said, right now, this is not about our separate tribes. This is about us and the survival of not only our people, but the survival of everybody else who gets water in the country. This is about survival. This is not about our little club. This is not about our little clique. This is not about our political affiliation. This is not about our sexuality, how we define ourselves. This is not about who we worship. This is about life. Because if we don't have life, none of that stuff matters. So their tagline was, water is life. That's all you needed to know. What are they fighting for? They're fighting for pipelines not to go through and destroy water. Because water is life. And it's not just life for them, it's life for everybody. Now, of course, we know that somebody came in and overturned, okay, their victory. They're still going through the process of that now because it was overturned by number 45. But the reality is they showed you what happens when people come in solidarity and they put down the sub labels. All right. And unfortunately, Black America has yet to do that. We've yet to put down the sub labels. And over and over and over again, we keep letting people drag us into arguments about the sub labels. When the reality is, if you look around, we all have an issue with survival. We all have a target on our backs when it comes to genocide. So we don't need to be arguing about what intellectual has the better solution or can frame our needs better. No, We need to be trying to figure out survival at this point. Think on it. We must stop apologizing, stop imitating, and begin to innovate. For a people to be free, they have to produce one sacrificial generation. That generation must be the role model for other generations to come. Maybe a generation will have to wear dungarees so that another generation can wear tuxedos. We haven't yet considered that. We have to seriously step back and think of what we need to do and how do we liberate ourselves from the plagues, cultural famine, and misconceptions set in motion by the rise of Europe during the Christopher Columbus period of the 15th and 16th centuries. How do we become a whole people again? I think we should begin by finding a mirror and liking what we see. Amen to that. If we can't like what we see, then we can't make each other whole again. It can't just be ceremony. We can't just decorate the outside of our head forever without putting something inside of our head. This man is preaching. We can't have war between men and women because no people can be free if one half of the mind of the people is tied up in conflict. It's going to have to be both of us or none of us. We're going to have to find some unity that stretches across ideology lines, cultural lines, accent lines, national lines, colorism lines. We're hung up with so many offbeat religions, none of which we created. We're cutting each other to pieces, deserting each other, destroying each other based on ideologies of no consequence to us as a people. I remember as a little boy on a farm, I was churning until the butter came to the top. I'm counting the churns and I asked my great-grandmother, which one of the churns brings up the butter? She said, all of them, my son. Which one? No one. All of them. We have to realize it is not the effort of any one of us that will necessarily lead to freedom, but the collect work of all of us who are sincere. That will ultimately end in the freedom and liberation of our people and the indoctrination of our own children so that they in turn will pick up responsibility and create an age where you never have to call for freedom again because there will never be any need to call for it. From that day forward, we will always have it. This is our mission and in turn the legacy that we need to leave for our children and still the more beautiful ones not yet born. Our enslavement and the wreck and ruin of the sovereign states of Africa started at the beginning of the colonial era. Our enslavement and the rape of the services of our countries helped to lay the basis of present-day capitalism, and now it's laying the basis for economic growth again for yet another country, China. All right, it's re-enslavement happening again over in Africa. Again, the Europeans have squandered their wealth on wars and conflicts that could have been avoided. They've already proven that they have one mission in mind, irrespective of religion, politics, or cultural affiliation. And that mission is to dominate the world and all of its resources by any means necessary. We have seen this. We just got a tax bill that proves this. Dominate the world and its resources by any means necessary. The new rationale for this dominance is now called a New World Order. All African and other non-European people should be on the alert because a new form of slavery is going to be more brutal and more sophisticated than the slavery of the Christopher Columbus era. And you can bet your bottom dollar it is coming. Africans and other non-European people must plan and strategize for a new world order distinctly their own that will be developed by them and for them. Our mission should not be to conquer Europe, but to contain it within its borders and let it be known that anything Europe wants from other parts of the world can be had through honorable trade. If we understand our mission, I think we will become aware of the fact that we are in a position to give the world a new humanity that will bring into a new world of safety and respect for all people. The Nile River civilizations of Africa gave the world its first humanity, its first belief systems, its first social thought, and its first philosophy. With the restoration of confidence, we need to say to ourselves, if we did it once, we can do it again. Now, I don't know if you all have been following this in the news, but again, China and some other nations are trying to come together, and they want to open up what you might have been taught in history was the Silk trade routes. All right. And but they actually want to not just make these routes that were traveled to do trade with other nations, but now they actually want to turn these into not just boat routes or marine routes, but they actually want to turn them into physical routes, because now, of course, we have the technology to do it. So they want to build roads. They want to build underground water tunnels. They want to build bridges that are going to connect all of these different countries. So if you go and you research online, what were the Silk trade routes? They'll pull up these maps and they'll show you all of these traveling patterns that were going on between different countries to trade their goods. Here's what they're proposing, though, which I don't think people are paying attention to. They've got to have people who are going to build these routes. And chances are they're not going to be paying people to build these routes. So who are they going to get to build these routes? That should be a question on everybody's mind. All right? Who are they going to get to build these routes? We already know, and it's already been shown, that prisoners are being used, right, as free labor or nearly free labor. Some of them get paid, I think, like 15 cents an hour or 25 cents an hour to do labor. They do labor for companies. They make clothing for different companies. But that could be expanded the more that the prison industry becomes privatized, that now, if you're in a prison that's privately owned, who's to say they won't be shipping prisoners off to China to get these things built? So, got to think ahead. And you have to think about, if they need an extensive labor and workforce, who do you think they're going to be trying to use to do that? Lastly, and I do want to finish this, so I'm going to go a few minutes past 12. All right. When will we memorialize the victims of our Holocaust? It is unfortunately forgotten that during slavery and colonialism, Africa and its people suffered the greatest loss in population, cultural devastation of any people in history. There is no memorial calling attention to this event any place in all the world. The Africans in Africa have not properly memorialized their loss, and the Africans outside of Africa, the major victims of slavery and colonization, have erected no edifices or monument to remind their children that some of them survived the greatest protracted crime in history. I maintain that the people of the entire African world, both in Africa and abroad, are delinquent in their responsibility to their ancestors until some proper memorials are erected in every place of the world where there is an African population. Now, of course, we know, fast forward, there have been some memorials that have been designed, right? And then we have the museum that just opened up here in DC that I've been to twice, and I plan on going one more time. All right. So since this writing, he was correct that there have been very few memorializations of this, but now they have been built. They're starting to be built. There's also one, I believe, in Alabama that is opening up, I believe, in 2018, that's supposed to memorialize victims of lynching. All right. You want to check with the Equal Justice Initiative. They're the ones that are creating this museum. And if you go on their Facebook page, they've got actually some models on there to show you what it's going to look like when they open it up. Again, that's the Equal Justice Initiative. This subject is so big that it is frightening. I wonder why a people as large as we are, engaged in as many activities as we are engaged in, have waited so long to think of addressing ourselves to the subject. Our Holocaust. It is our Holocaust because this is a Holocaust that started 500 years ago, and it is not over. We do not start our count at 6 million. We start counting at 60 million. And we have just begun to count. Now, I do not mean to negate the German and the European Holocaust. Whether the number was 6 or 60, even if it was 3 million, it was still wrong. But it was a problem started in Europe by Europeans. There is no comparison between this tragedy and our tragedy, which was the greatest single crime in the history of the world. Why haven't we memorialized them? It was almost like the crime of them not being buried and some of them being thrown overboard. Let's look at it historically, broadside, before we come to the subject. Why are we a people whom so many have said have no history pursued by so many other people? Why is it that we have been a prize to be captured down through the years? It is because of a prevailing thing that prevails right now. African people have been under siege for the same reason they are under siege right now. They have always had and still have something other people want, think they can't do without, and necessarily don't want to pay for. We keep using the word apartheid about South Africa. It is a minor issue in comparison to the real issue. The real issue in South Africa is a form of economic slavery. It is Western domination of the mineral wealth of South Africa and subsequently the mineral wealth of the whole world. The assault on South Africa, the assault on Africa in general, is an assault on the gold in the Western Sudan, and there lies the major gold wealth of Africa. Except for it, the economic system under which you live would not be the same or even reasonably the same. And now, again, fast forward from this writing, think about the last 20 years of cell phones. Think about the last 20 years of cell phone development, right? We now have the devices that we have because of the minerals that they're using that comes out of Africa. All right? So they're still mining the wealth of Africa and not just gold anymore, not just oil anymore. Let us go to the background of the tragedy because very often you think this has happened quite by accident. Let's set the stage for what happened. It is too big for literature. It is a world drama, a tragedy, and it started inside of the European mind. Let us look at the 200-year turning point in history, 1400 to 1600 AD. Let's look at where Europe was. Europe had just finished a period of the Crusades, one of the great phony charades of human history. It had nothing to do with religion. It was a political move to divert the attention of Europe from the fact that the church had played so many games on the people that the people were about to explode and destroy the church. So they found an issue to divert the people's attention from that fact. Once they started them to marching and going to rescue the Holy Grail, which was not lost in the first place, they would forget that they had been bled dry to build all those churches and cathedrals so that all the priests and monks could live in luxury while most of the population of Europe lived in poverty. Sounds familiar. They would forget that Europeans had to a great extent enslaved other Europeans. Feudalism was still rampant in Europe. Now, divert their attention, they needed an issue. The Crusades, the rescue of the Holy Grail, the fight against the hated infidel became that great issue. The Africans and Arabs had blocked Europe's entry to the Mediterranean since 711 AD, when the African general Tariq bin Ziyad had conquered Spain. It was an African-Arab partnership. Now, when the Arabs write history, they leave out the Africans, and when the Europeans write, they leave out the Africans. So, therefore, if you want to get the story in, you have to write the story. We're at the end of this dominance, the great flourishing period of scientific discovery. You assume that when Europe was having its Middle Ages, everyone else was having theirs. There were people in the world who had no Middle Age, no age of awkwardness, backwardness, no feudalism, and those people were in Africa. Inner West Africa, the Western Sudan. Three great magnificent African states, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, unfolded while Europe was having its period of depression, depravity, war, famine, disease, and hunger. But they're not going to tell you that. Got to read some history books, all right? The last of these states was now reaching the apex of its grandeur. In 1415, the Portuguese attacked a part of Morocco. a little place called Ceuta, C-U-E-T-A, and for the first time, a European had taken over some African territory. This put heart in Europe because they had at last invaded the territory of what they considered to be the hated infidel. At this juncture of history, everyone not of your chosen religion was considered to be an infidel, and unfortunately, we're going back to that. The European Christian called the Arab infidel. The Arabs called the Christians infidels. They had been capturing each other in the Mediterranean, but for the first time, the European Christian had taken some land from the African. In 1450, the Africans and Arabs were having an argument in Spain. This argument was weakening their hold on Spain. In 1455, Spain and Portugal had gained enough freedom from the Arab-African domination to go to the Pope to seek arbitration, because now they were getting colonial ambitions of their own. They said, once we are free of the Moorish domination, the black domination, what are we going to do? They were now talking about what part of the world they were going to take. The Pope, settling the argument, said, you are both authorized to reduce to servitude all infidel people. He issued a papal bull to this effect. All right? This event is well documented, but best done in Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams. Europe begins to awake from its lethargy. Prince Henry, called Henry the Navigator, although there was no evidence he ever went to sea, finds a series of maps. The maps were used by Jewish gold dealers in the Western Sudan. The Jews had access to the Western Sudan before anyone else, and in preference to others. This is another lecture for another day. But for over 3,000 years, people called Hebrews or Jews had been given preferred treatment over other people, a fact which they never acknowledged to this day. They were given preferred treatment in the trade of gold in the Western Sudan. They were the major gold dealers between Spain, the Mediterranean states, and the nations in Africa called the Western Sudan. They had made maps of the areas going into that Western Sudan, and these were some of the maps that Henry the Navigator got a hold of to start his own school of chart making and map making. Europe had lost the concepts of longitude and latitude. That's why they weren't going anywhere. But they learned from the information gathered in Spain and preserved by the Africans and Arabs at the University of Salamanca. There were only two great universities in the world at the time, Salamanca in Spain and Sankore at Timbuktu. There was no Harvard, no Cambridge, no Oxford. None of these schools were in existence. Two universities in the whole world were created and run by Africans and Africans in Spain. They had translated the maritime information coming out of China, the leading maritime nation of the world of that day. With maritime knowledge, the European now goes out to sea. The Africans also preserved the intellectual masters of Europe, Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, as well as some of the basis of European Christianity. They would now use that information and turn on the people who had preserved it. No one, but no one, has ever sent us a thank you note for anything we ever did, which makes us totally unobligated. We owe no one anything politically left or right. Everybody who has come among us has taken away more than they brought and more than they gave. We have been humane to all the people we have met. No one ever fought their way into Africa. They came as guests and stayed as conquerors or slave traders. With Europeans beginning to see the light, they start looking for something to replenish their empty bowls, economy, and resources. They are coming out of the lethargy, the ignorance, the disease, the war, the famine of the Middle Ages. They have survived famines and plagues and lost 1/3 of their own population. They are looking for the spices and sweets of the East. They were not looking for Africa at first. They were looking for something to put on their food so they could eat it. And they discovered Africa en route. They discovered a richer prize while seeking a route to the East, and they captured this prize instead of pursuing the route to Asia. They would get to Asia and find Asia more politically sophisticated because they were accustomed to conquerors and visitors with no good intentions. Europe would have to deal with the Asians in a different way. The Asians would have invited them to dinner, but they would have watched them throughout the dinner if they suspected that they had evil intentions. They might have slipped something into their food. But the Africans, oh, they were generous, and that's why they were trapped. The Portuguese began to come down the coast of Africa in 1438, but didn't begin to take slaves out of Africa until 1442. Their taking of slaves out of Africa started with a misunderstanding of African internal servitude, which was based on the extraction of labor after war captivity. Many times Africans captured in internal wars, sometimes skirmishes, had to work many months or years as penalty for losing the war. They were not the slaves that many white supremacists claimed that they were. There were no great casualties. After serving their period of indenture, they would go free. You lost the war, that was what you had to do. Once there was an accumulation of labor over and above what could be used locally, since the Africans had no massive transportation, they began to use Portuguese ships to lend that labor to other kings or chiefs further down the coast. The Portuguese interpreted this as Africans enslaving other Africans and subsequently used this rationale to do the same thing. The role of Africans in the slave trade is still being misinterpreted by Africans, African Americans, and especially white scholars who are not scholarly enough to understand Africans could not have possibly managed or set in motion anything as massive as a three-continent industry of the Western slave trade. Let us look at this turning point in history, this 200-year turning point with Europe coming out of the Middle Ages and relearning the skill of shipping. Europe relearning the skill of shipping, of sea navigation. Europe, having lost its sentimental attachment to itself and their own people, began to explode. We must look at the world after 1492, but even before that, there's a date you have to reconsider, which is 1482. When an expedition sailed down the coast of West Africa and demanded to build the fortress at Elmina. In this grouping of ships were sailors and soldiers waiting offshore. For if the king did not buy the Bible story, he'd have to buy the gun story. The Portuguese forced their way in and built the first permanent fortification, Elmina Castle, the largest slaveholding fortress in all of West Africa. In this expedition was a little-known sailor named Cristobal Colon, later known as Christopher Columbus. He said in his diary, "As a man and boy, I sailed up and down the Guinea coast for 23 years. What was he doing up and down the coast? He was involved in the early Portuguese slave trade. This is why, once he and his disease-ridden men had almost destroyed the Caribs and the Arawaks, whom he mistakenly called Indians, he himself suggested bringing Africans to replace them. He had asked Father de las Casas to go to Rome to get the sanction of the church to do so, and this father did exactly that. Of course, near the end of his life, Father de las Casas said that it was wrong to enslave the Africans as well as the Indian, but that was 35 years later. The Indians were dead and some of the Africans were dead. What I'm trying to look at is that the war on the Africans started before he got on the ship. This is a war waged on the structure of African society, especially the family, in that the attack on the black male started right there and continues to this day. The Color Purple was not a movie. It was a continuation of that war. You might have looked at it for entertainment, but that was not entertainment. It was propaganda. More skillful because black people participated in it and rationalized about it and said it was art. I've gone through these slave forts, most of the major ones. I went to Gorée, the slave fort in the French area, and that's the third time I've gone through. If you look at this structure, it was designed so that the slave sellers lived in luxury over the slave dungeons below. Upon the onset of evening, the women would be assembled in the courtyard so that the captains could pick out one they wanted to violate that night. These Africans had not even left Africa yet. We see the beginning of a process which we have not dealt with as a people. Bastardization, when they not only bastardized the body, but the mind. Today, you can find a jet black person with a bastardized mind. He doesn't know where his mind is, who he's loyal to, or who his paymaster is. But that process of physical bastardization would begin there, and part of the mental would also begin there, because sometimes they kept back the mother and the child, and they would later become part of the slave trade system in the village around the fort. Now, once the system got underway and the people were on their way to various markets, we have another process, which is the same process in a slightly different way. This is a tragedy of such proportion that it taxes the imagination, and some black people want to forget about it. And maybe this is why we have not memorialized our dead. This constitutes the greatest number of unmemorialized people in the history of the whole world. No other people have permitted that many of their people to die and have not attempted to make a suitable memorial for them. It's like they are still there, like their voices are still there. They have left us with something. I remember speaking to Ray Charles once, and I was trying to explain the nature of the genius in his voice, and he didn't get the point. I said, Ray, the particular genius in your voice is that of protracted crying. That's the wail and the crying in those slave ships coming back down through the genes and through the years. He shook his head and said, where do you get this crazy cat from? He missed the point. I had never been more sincere in all my life, and I believe that the genius of our survival is what we have misunderstood. When we discuss the numbers lost in this slave trade, we are in an endless discussion of how many, and that depends on who you're listening to. If 20 million people cleared through one slave portal, that's just one fortress and not even the largest one. 20 million cleared through that one place, and they were late in getting started. They became the monster, the largest of the slave forts, whose dungeons could hold over 1,000 at one time. Let's put these people together. Another figure is to add that of those lost in the movement from the coast, sometimes 7 out of 10 were lost. Sometimes slave catchers in competition with each other, or just for meanness, killed each other's captives. That means that 100% got lost, or 10 out of 10. These are statistics that did not get into anyone's computer. Some of the slave captains were thieves and cheats, working for absentee slave owners. They might load 350 slaves on a ship and list only 300 in their log. They might stop at a port and sell 50 for themselves and put the proceeds directly in their pocket. These statistics get lost. They don't get into anybody's computer, but the money got into their pockets. I'm saying that nearly every figure you could hear could possibly be wrong or could be partly right. But understand what is happening now. There was no resource in all the world that Europe could get to rebuild its financial structure after the Middle Ages. The economy of Europe was rebuilt on the slave trade. That, except for this trade, the economy of Europe would not have pulled out the depression of the Middle Ages, except for us, and except for what was extracted from us. It did not start on its way to recovery in the United States, because the United States in this early period did not exist. The recovery started in the exploitation of the plantation system of the Caribbean islands. How the people got there was a double miracle, because a question arose between the slave sellers and shippers over the packing. If they packed the slaves tight, they're talking about the Middle Passage itself, how they packed them in the ship through suffocation, and large numbers of them would die. From 1/3 to 1/2 of them would not reach the market. So the argument became, is it more economic to loose pack or tight pack? No one was talking or thinking about Africans as human beings. Sometimes the sickly and the rebellious were just thrown overboard. The total dehumanization is what has to be looked at. In the establishment of South America and the Caribbean islands, something happened there that didn't happen in the United States. The slave masters brought in large lots and kept them together. They thought they could work them better that way, and they were right. But they forgot the Africans could revolt better that way. They maintained cultural continuity to a great extent. They could speak the same language. If you sold grandma or grandpa or uncle to someone on the other side of the island, they could walk to the other side of the island and see their relatives. There was a language that all of them understood, and that was the drum. In the United States, they outlawed all African instruments and African religion, and this left the African in the United States without anything other than mental recall. Here, they bought in small lots and broke those lots up. When people do that, they break up the African loyalty system. We suffer to this day because they broke our loyalty system. This breakage caused the creation of a cleavage between the field black and the house black. That's what Malcolm X was trying to explain. Now you can understand why in South America and in the Caribbean, many slave revolts were planned and executed by house servants, while in the United States, many of them were betrayed by house servants. It has nothing to do with which one of those people were braver than the other, but by breaking our cultural continuity, they broke the line of loyalty one to the other. We look at those people in the house and we say, we don't know what tribe they came from. They didn't come from my tribe. I can tell by the scars on their face they didn't come from my tribe. So I don't have any loyalty to him. He's up there eating food in the house while I'm out here eating this coarse food in the field. I don't have any feelings towards him. Who is he? But the man in the field in the Caribbean and the one in the house can tell by the speech and the look of the other that they came from the same basic area in Africa and possibly the same group. Caribbeans misunderstand this to this day, but most Black Americans never knew it. But we have got to study both. If we're going to affect unity, understand that we've got to look at all of the Africans who were brought here. And we will have to pay some special attention to those in South America, especially Brazil, where the largest number exists today. They did more with African cultural continuity and with the consistency of it than any Africans in the New World, including Haiti. Did more with it by establishing 2 African states in Brazil, Bahia and the Palmeiras, one of which lasted 110 years. What I am trying to show is that in a collective way, through the Africans in the Middle Passage and through what was extracted from them, an economy came into being, and that economy made possible the modern, technical, scientific world of the West. That world was built on our sweat and our labor, and our death now says what we cannot do. When they struck at Africa, when Africa was on the verge of the pre-industrial age, we will never know what Africa could have been because they struck while Africa was growing. The internal differences between African state and African state were far less than some differences between European state and European state right now. But the African suffered from a kind of naivety he is still suffering from. He permitted Europeans to arbitrate his family disputes. Today in Africa, if there's a dispute, sometimes even a child can arbitrate. The African always looks for an arbitrator. It is part of his custom. If there's a dispute or a fight, the African looks around and says, who's going to settle this thing? I've been in Africa and seen a man and woman fighting. They were arguing, just an argument. The first time I didn't know what to do because this lady called me over and said, I have won this argument. Come here and settle this thing. I didn't know what it was about or what I was supposed to do. She said, finish, finish. I won the argument. Now settle it so we can go my way. I can go on my way. She wasn't going to move until someone said it was settled. They thought that the whites were just arbitrators, but they did not know that the white people then would turn on them and put one another against the other and conquer both of them. In many cases, this is what was done. Because of their African continuity, the slave revolts in the Caribbean Islands and South America were more successful. But there were slave revolts all over. When you say maroons, most people think you're talking about people in Jamaica. That's just a word for a runaway slave. There were maroons in the United States who ran to the hills, set up settlements, and never submitted to slavery. All over South America, there was a consistency in revolt, and there was a consistency in trying to maintain the culture. In this country, you will find remains of African customs spelled out in parts of New Orleans. But New Orleans was under French rule, and so the French also brought in large lots and kept them together. You will find where people were permitted to settle without being sold and resold rapidly. Therefore, they managed to hold their culture together. All right, so this is where we are. The one thing in conclusion that I'm asking you not to do is to forgive and forget. Your mission is to remember and to teach your children so that they can remember it. Because it happened to us, we have a responsibility to ourselves to build a kind of humanity and partnership with African people of the world that could serve as a model for all the people of the world. I'm not saying that we have to be nicer than other people. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about non-violence. I'm saying we are fortunate because the entire continent of Africa belongs to us. No matter who is there, who lives in Africa, all of it is ours, and we don't have to quote scriptures to prove it. We are the only people with a continent that belongs solely to us. Once you put African people, their energy, their imagination together, once they begin to feed each other and support each other, there's no need for them to conquer anyone or threaten anyone, and they, above all other people, can offer the world a new humanity and a new way of life. They might be the only people who can give this world some kind of security because they can see the stupidity of atomic weaponry because they want to live and have proven it. I think the fools who are playing with nuclear weapons now also want to live, but they think they can use it and kill others and still live themselves. I think that bringing all these African people together can show the world it would be a better place by virtue of them coming together and being successfully dependent upon themselves, delivering goods and services to themselves. But they will have to get some illusions out of their minds first. They have to develop an entirely different concept of education. Powerful people never educate you in how to take their power away from them, and their schools are not going to give you the kind of education you need. You have to make it or take it. When you get the kind of education you need, you will discover the green fields of Africa, and you won't have to go to Africa to improve Africa. Africa is where you are. You start with your community, with yourself, and you begin to see and understand revolutionary change. The greatest memorial that can be to the people of the Middle Passage, while I call for and strongly suggest a physical memorial, preserving, so that our children will know that it wasn't easy, would be to remind them of the work they still have to do. I think that the greatest change is going to have to be with each one of you, and your greatest memorial to those who died in the Middle Passage will be what each individual does to bring revolutionary change to yourself and to your community. I think you should start with a mirror. You should look in the mirror until you like what you see. And then you say, my revolution starts with me, and my memorial to the people in the Middle Passage starts right now. As Michael Jackson said, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. I want to thank you all for this season's reading of completing Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, Slavery and the Rise of European Capitalism. If you missed the readings on this book, you can go back to any of my Teachable Tuesdays for this season, and you will see us reading through this entire book. All right? He said some very, very important things. He talked about the nature of African people and how that nature continues to get us entrapped. And you see it. I mean, he's telling the truth. The nature of African people is to befriend you. It is to be kind. It is not to be bringing harm and death and destruction on people. I'm talking about the nature. When it's not, how can I say? When it's not contaminated by maybe a religion that tells you to kill all infidels. All right? The nature of the people is to live peaceably. And they were doing that, handling their business, handling their wars, handling their captives. And then, as he said, the nature of Africans is to have someone come in and settle a dispute, not recognizing that those people did not come to settle a dispute. They came to turn you against each other, and they've been doing that ever since. So You know, no need to go any further than out your front door to see that is actually still in effect of black people turning on each other and turning inward. Even with the thing that happened with, what's her name? Omarosa. And I'm closing. Even with the thing that happened with Omarosa, I immediately saw black women come to the forefront to turn against her. Do I agree with Omarosa? No. Do I agree with her policies? No. Do I agree with her thought process? No. But some conversations that black people need to be having don't need an audience. Some conversations that the black community needs to be having does not need an audience of other people. But what are people doing? You'll see a whole panel. It'll be black people talking about Omarosa in one case, and one white woman sitting in the corner laughing at all of y'all. That's what I saw. Because as long as I could get you all, as long as I could keep you all talking about each other, you'll never pay attention to what's being done to all of you. All right? So that's just a little tip there. All right? Those of you who are in media. Focus, focus, focus. Focus on the bigger picture. Focus on the larger goal. Same thing that's happening with Ta-Nehisi Coates, whose books we've read on here, and Cornel West, whose books we've also read on here. Both of them have something to offer the black community. Both of them have something to offer in perspective. But guess what? Now they're against each other. All right? Again, divide and conquer. As long as I can get you all focused inwardly, you'll never pay attention to what's happening to you all collectively. And we have to, at some point, understand that people are playing chess. They're not playing Connect Four with us. Okay? Until we understand that, you're going to continue to see the same patterns played out over and over and over again. At some point, we got to wake up, people. You got to wake up. All right? So, I want to thank you all. I did not intend for this broadcast to be an hour and a half, but there you have it. All right? So, thank you for your time and attention. We will be back tomorrow. We'll only be on 1 hour. We'll be back with our Wednesday relationship segment. We'll be talking again to married, single, engaged people. And hopefully I will say something tomorrow that will be helpful to you all. We will be back reading about the kingdom woman tomorrow. All right, we're going to focus on the kingdom woman, the kingdom wife. We'll also talk a little bit about what's happening with singles. What is happening with singles? I'm seeing some very not good attitudes coming out of the singles community. And I want to talk about what is fueling it. I really do. I want to talk about what's fueling it because I think it's dangerous. I also think it's dangerous specifically for the black community. All right. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. What is going on with the singles? What's the attitude about? What's the bitterness about? What's driving that? And so I want to talk about that tomorrow. All right. So again, I thank you for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. Love on others, but also love on you. And you can't do either of those well if you're neglecting your love on God. All right. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Take care and God bless. And I want to thank you for watching on our YouTube broadcast as well. Thank you again, and we'll be back on tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Take care and God bless.